You're listening to The Hurt Locker, the podcast that opens the door on men's mental health. And tonight's guest, we have none other than Dane Baptiste. Dane, welcome to The Hurt Locker.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
It's so happy to have you here. And for want of repeating myself, I'm going to just let people know when we tried to record this earlier on in the week, but I was in a Premier Inn and their Wi-Fi was awful and it was very much like staccato interviews, so it didn't happen. So Dane has kindly allowed us to record a few days later. So I appreciate that. But the point I wanted to make was that when we've reached out to certain guests previously, they've said no. But when we've told them that you're coming on, or they've seen that you're coming on, then they're like that. Okay, let's come on the Hurt Locker. I'll come on the Hurt Locker. So props to you anyway.
Oh, no, thank you very much. It's very humbling and flattering to know that I can have that kind of positive influence. So, I've not had any of the typical plaudits and awards and stuff you get in comedy, but having that kind of, I suppose, being able to give that seal of approval is just as valuable. So, no, thank you very much, and glad it's helped. Anytime.
Thank you. And you know what? Sometimes I do think about that. People acknowledging who you are and the work that you do, etc. But it doesn't change who you are as an individual, if that makes sense. You know, you don't need the gong or anything just to be your authentic self.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely been a repeated theme in my life where, I have always, I'd say I'm privileged to enjoy the support of my peers and stuff a lot of the time, even though the higher echelons or authorities don't always acknowledge that contribution. But I suppose the way I always rationalize it is that when I started doing comedy and had the opportunity to express myself creatively, I didn't really think about plaudits and awards. It was just the opportunity to do something that I liked and make a living from it. So I always try to ground myself in that fact. When I do, my ego does kind of get bruised. So,
and I suppose bruised egos is part and parcel of life when we're willing to be frontiers, men and women, when we're willing to step outside of what people will say is the thinking of the day, as it were. Yeah. You know, when you try and do something that's alternative or say something that may appear alternative, you do stand out.
Yeah, and it's something I'm learning and something I'm definitely becoming a lot more comfortable with. I think as I mature, just as an individual and a human being, but it's definitely been a much more valuable tool within the medium I work in. Obviously, comedy is it's a very solitary art form, and sometimes you have the tendency to look at yourself in comparison to others, which is always a thief of joy. And you can also, and by that same token, sometimes you feel like the success of others is a poor reflection of yourself. And I think that's really the thing that the ego tells you. But it's it's definitely been an interesting journey whereby I know there's been an element of trailblazing and kind of pioneering that hasn't always been recognized. But I definitely am able to reconcile that based on the changes I want to see actually being present. And yes. even if I'm not the person that's always credited with that, what's more important is that it exists in the same way that it's like I've always wanted to, encourage a space where, people from our community can unapologetically be themselves and show much more broader range of aesthetics that relate to Blackness. And even if, and that's not something you necessarily need credit for, I think it's much more important that that exists and that becomes a tangible reality for people rather than necessarily saying that you're credited with that. So
100%. And I will underline that by saying it doesn't matter who does it, just as long as it gets done.
Exactly. And that's the most important part. And it's always a way, like I said, I'm always able to kind of ground myself, is to remind myself that you're a brick in the wall and that there have been many pioneers that have sacrificed in various ways in order for us to get to the place we're in now. And, you think that's how you think about it. Like if people pass the torch to you, you think of it more like a baton.
Yes, 100%.
Do it in the way that someone else is going to take that from you. So
100%.
yeah, it makes it much easier to digest
100%.
sometimes.
And we're going to come back to this soon. And it's funny because when you say about a brick in the wall, I've been having these conversations with other people this week, about, I talk about myself and my role within the therapeutic community and just being a custodian of it to pass it on to newbies that come into the profession. But I look at the wider picture in terms of life itself and think, this can't be all it. There's much more than that, but we'll park that for now, and we'll begin by introducing you and getting our listeners to know about who is Dane Baptiste. Where did you grow up? Who are you?
Yeah. So I'm Dane Baptiste. I'm a comedian, a writer, times been a producer, and occasionally an actor. I was born in and grew up in Southeast London, more specifically Lewisham. Went to school there. And yeah, I've been doing comedy now for 14 years. And it's been an interesting journey. Aside from that, like do podcasting. I'm a friend, a brother, a father, and a son. And yeah, as I like to say, just to quote a comedian and an amazing philosopher, in my opinion, Bill Hicks, just
Indeed.
a part of a collective consciousness, subjectively experiencing life as a tight field of energy, and now the weather. But yeah, that's
and now the weather, indeed. So tell us about growing up. What was that like for you?
Growing up for me, I think that I'd say I definitely had a good childhood. I think that I credit a lot of that to my parents. I feel like they gave me a lot of opportunities. Some of them I didn't appear as grateful for at the time, but I think it was definitely a point of principle for my parents to make sure that I had all the opportunities they didn't have, and my mum especially wanted to immerse me in as many extracurricular activities as there were available. They highly valued education in academia, but also doing sports and martial arts and just the Cub Scouts, loads of random stuff. So I had a really varied experiences compared to a lot of my peers who themselves varied a lot, because I grew up in a predominantly white area, but I went to secondary school and spent a lot of time in predominantly black social circles. Then I found myself in university in West Yorkshire, which again was like a largely predominantly white working class and Asian area. Then moved back to London, and since doing comedy, it's probably been allowed for me to have the most varied interpersonal experience I've ever had in terms of the different people that I meet. But yeah, growing up was interesting. I think growing up in the 80s was interesting time. I think now we're much more aware of the state of economic times of the 80s and some of the emerging trends that came out of the 80s, but you wasn't aware of them as kids. So I guess my parents did a very good job of maintaining a certain standard of living for us, despite like the recession and the times that we're in. I think that so far as culturally, I think I definitely had a rich access to culture growing up. My family are based in London. My family are originally from Grenada. So growing up in Brockley is like quite a considerable Caribbean population, particularly from Grenada. My mum's got family in Huddersfield. My dad's got family and friends in Huddersfield. Spent a lot of time going to the States growing up, and I think that definitely was one of the larger influences on what formed my outward perception of things, and definitely what my motivations were. So,
in what sense?
Well, I think because growing up in the 80s and 90s in the UK, the opportunity for what I call cultural reflectors wasn't as vast as you find in the States. And by cultural reflectors, I mean, today, when you are a black person or any person of color, you're much more likely to see representation of yourself, whether it be in mainstream media, whether it be in advertising, as aesthetics then. And it's much more normalized now to see reflections of your culture, whereas that wasn't the same in the 80s. And particularly depending on where you lived as well, it's probably a lot easier for you living in a metropolis like London, and maybe to a lesser extent places like Manchester. But compared to a lot of the diaspora, I think that going to America definitely exposed me to what seemed to be a much more advanced version of the diaspora's culture. In the States, I'd see, you had like BET, so you're seeing black people in adverts all the time. I think going to the States in the 90s really definitely formed, or definitely helped my artistic inspiration, because spending summers in Brooklyn, again, you see so many other cultural reflectors. Brooklyn has an enormous Caribbean population, and a much more thriving one and conspicuous one. And the 90s was also like a renaissance of like black media and arts and media, because this was kind of like the rise of Spike Lee and his films, as well as John Singleton as well. And they kind of covered the more dramatic side, but then you had like things like In Living Color with the Wayans brothers and them doing parody films and stuff as well. But then there were also films like The Naked Gun and Problem Child, and lots of like comedic films that definitely were influential to me. So, also music and stuff as well, which I'm a big fan. So it was almost like the way that the internet has made the world so much smaller now. It wasn't really like that in the 90s. So I remember I'd go. Perfect example being, I remember the end of the 90s, like early 2000s, coming back from a trip to the States and saying to my friends, there's this new rapper in New York that everyone's going crazy for, and he's going to be enormous. And his name is 50 Cent, and he's going to take over. And they were like, really? Are you sure? I was like, I'm telling you, this guy called 50 Cent, he's going to be enormous. And I remember another time coming back, like maybe 2001, coming back from the States and being like to my friends, listen, guys, there is this rapper producer that I've heard on mixtapes, and he is going to be enormous. He produces for Jay-Z. I'm telling you, his name is Kanye West, and he is going to be enormous. And then being like, really? And I'm like, I'm telling you, this guy is going to be so big, it's insane. And it was kind of like, always having this kind of advanced access to culture almost before it touched like British shores. Was almost like a
prophecy.
Yeah. And then the kind of USP of my personality and stuff as well. And just a lot of these trends that eventually make their way to like the UK and Europe and to the diaspora, you were kind of getting that ahead of time, because I'd have like my cousins and stuff that would introduce me to things. And so very culturally enriching experience there, and definitely gave me a much broader viewpoint to approach my life, and also helping to form my identity as well.
You mentioned about it was primarily your mum was the driver in terms of those extracurricular activities, etc., that most of your peers, perhaps most of your black peers, perhaps didn't have access to and all that. Was there a begrudging reluctance to participate in those extracurricular activities, as opposed to what your friends were doing, which is, I'll say it, not doing much at all,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. I think that there was, I think an adolescence is a point in people's lives where you are seeking a certain element of conformity. As you're forming your own self-image and identity politics becomes a large part of most people's lives as they become teenagers. And, you're trying to work out what you're a part of, because you're also trying to find your independence, which means that you're trying to find a group to be a part of outside of the authoritarian or guardian position that your parents play, and, almost forging a life yourself that exists outside of like, cultural or family obligations. So for me, like, there's a lot of things where I'd be like, no one else that's here looks like me that's doing this. Like, my friends don't go camping. Like, why am I here? And I always just found myself at my comfort zone. And I feel like that definitely helped me to form my comedic voice, because comedy, when it's not being done professionally, is always used as a very effective icebreaker, which is why people introduce speeches, or when someone is doing like a public address, they'll try and use jokes as an icebreaker to kind of disarm and relax everybody. And it helps with rapport building. And so when I found myself in spaces where I was definitely the only black person, which was so many times, then normally, and this is done, I guess, with the context of being aware of how you might be perceived initially, comedy was always the way you'd have to kind of disarm people and by showing you have a sense of humor, would kind of relax people as well. Not too much that people would think that you were too passive and vulnerable, but it was just enough whereby you almost appeared a bit more approachable. And also, I think it also helps you to manage the situation you're in. So where I found myself in a lot of uncomfortable situations, or a few things happened, which I was just like, why is this even happening? There would be a lot of times where I'd be like, And I guess again, this influence from, consuming so many sitcoms in the States, I'd be like, I felt like I was a straight man in a sitcom.
Yes.
And I guess it was a way of rationalizing my environment and being able to kind of navigate it.
Can I ask, growing up predominantly in a white area, even though it's diverse, predominantly white area, were you exposed to racism? And if so, how did you combat that?
It's a good question. And I think that it's a question that should be asked to all people of color and particularly Black people, because I definitely equate early experiences of racism to early experiences of sexual trauma or sexual objectification, because it's something that can happen where very often for someone to form their racial identity, you're told, you're not asked, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So for me, like, I experienced casual racism at the age of like 7 and 8. And then I remember talking to my older sister because I didn't understand what the word meant and why people were saying it. And she was only 2 years older than me, but I believe gave a very good explanation. It was just like, some people will hate you because of who you are and they're just stupid. There's nothing you can do about it. And I felt like, she was definitely giving me the best kind of way to soothe or help to self-soothe that she knew. But I think I was always somebody who definitely had a thirst for knowledge. So that wasn't enough for me. So my mom used to bring us to the library every week and we'd be able to exchange books, and she encouraged it outside of school. And I remember that there was a series of books by Coretta Scott King about big civil rights leaders.
Yes.
I remember reading about Martin Luther King and reading about Malcolm X. And
at what age?
That 8. So it was really early for me. But I think these books are designed for children to be able to understand. So it was quite early for me. And I think that initially, and I think this is largely due to upbringing, ideologically, I kind of gravitated towards earlier Martin Luther King, maybe non-violent, maybe integration kind of thing.
As opposed to Malcolm X?
As opposed to later on in my life, where definitely more towards Malcolm X and what people refer to as a lot more militant. But what is interesting is that at some point, both of these perspectives and ideologies converge.
Absolutely.
So, that was kind of interesting to know as well. But I think, my early research into becoming aware of self was essential. And I think definitely a beneficial practice for me, because at latter points in my life where there were maybe people using more casual or flippant racism, or what today we refer to as microaggressions.
Yes.
I was a lot more attuned to it and could respond to it. And that in itself led to a lot of problems, because delinquency is definitely conflated with young Black men and precipitates as like multiple exclusions from school systems. But being a smart Black kid that asks questions or can rebut
that's dangerous. That's dangerous.
It's much more dangerous.
It's
much more dangerous. And it, I think it definitely scared the shit out of a lot of my teachers. And where some kids might talk about being bullied by other children because of their appearance or because of their platitudes, I was getting into it with teachers a lot of the time. And I recall like my last 2 years, when I was like year 5 and year 6. Year 6 was like maybe every 2 months, my mum talking about me being expelled from school. And, to be fair, she was always massively supportive, because, it wasn't something where I was being violent or having violent outbursts towards people or being aggressive. But she was like, if they kick you out here, you just go to another school. But it was knowing who you are at a very young age, when people in an institution are trying to form your mind for you, can be a very contentious position to be in. And I remember one of my distinct memories is there was my teachers, kids sit on the carpet to be read to.
Yeah.
And one of my teachers used to read from like a book of poems. And one of the poems was a poem called "That's Not Fair." And my teacher was saying as a kid and reading the stanzas, and the kid would be like, "Well, that's not fair." And she was like, "Hey kids, who does that sound like?" And they were all like, "Dane, it sounds like Dane, miss." And I was like,
wow.
Well, even this is not fair, because you're singling me out in front of a whole class. So I don't know what you expect me to say, because this would break most children. And that's the one clear memory. And the other clear memory I have was my last day of school. So in my class, because I have a twin sister, so in my twins class, there's like 6 black kids in her class, and in my class there's 3, 2 girls and myself, and then my sister and her friends. And I remember going into my sister's class. I think I was like getting one piece of work like kind of finished before the last day, just to complete everything. And then there was like a brief period of like saying goodbye to my friends and stuff. And again, like, you know, I enjoy doing the whole comedy thing and stuff. And I think I was making a few just off the cuff jokes to my friends. And my sister's teacher, Miss Taylor, she goes to me, "Oh, what are you doing in here? Oh, Mr. Funny. Well, let me tell you something. No one's laughing with you. They're laughing at you. And I don't imagine you'll go very far in life, Dane." And even then, at 11, and I know a lot of people have this story and they tell it from the perspective of how traumatic it was for a teacher not to believe in you and try to dampen your spirit. But for me at 11, I was kind of like, well, this is the last day of school and I'm not even in your class. And yet somehow you are threatened by the popularity I have in your class. And then I kind of was aware of the power that humor has to combat against, you know, being profiled or being attacked or being microaggressed. Because once you respond with violence, it's much easier for people to just
you're beaten then.
You're aggressive. And so it was kind of very easy for me to kind of be like, it'd be very easy for them to be like, well, he can't be handled the rest of it. But to be able to have a teacher lose their cool awakened an awareness and a power in me that I have probably carried to this day. So
I'm going to say this. Maybe I'm talking from my perspective and my own observations, because in fact I was the only black boy in my class growing up and that. But it feels like you were ahead of the curve at such a young age.
Yeah, I think
you were self-aware. I'm not saying that I wasn't, because I know my early teens, etc., when I went to a diverse school, that was a game changer for me.
Yeah,
but you're 9, 10, 11. You've got the hotspurs, as it were, to be able to retort. And I'm wondering, your mum was in your corner. Your mum was your cheerleader. Yeah. She was backing you. What was your dad like?
My dad was, and it's been like this to this day. My dad has a trait which I sometimes reflect on my own life and feel like if I exhibited it more often, maybe I'd get in less trouble. So my dad is someone who's very intellectual, and well, actually, I prefer to describe it as wisdom, because intellect is a very subjective thing that academics and self-professed intellectuals like to compartmentalize certain sciences and certain fields of study, because by being like, I'm an expert in this particular field.
I hate that word, experts.
Yes. So they like, I'm an expert in this field, and that makes me a more learned person than you. Whereas wisdom is something that comes with experience, and wisdom can be applied to various different fields of study.
Yes.
So I'd say my dad is a very wise man. And now when I think about, like, my dad would read maybe 3 or 4 papers a day, or he could get his hands on, then he'd always be sitting down and watching like question night. And he cut a very intimidating figure in the household. I think that's the case for a lot of men when they look towards a patriarch. Yeah. But my dad always came across as very stoic. Like, I was a very short kid until a certain point. My dad is like 6'1", and always seemed like he was kind of brooding. But I think he's someone who learned that he's someone who waits to be asked, or he will be asked rather than he'll tell people. And sometimes that's probably a very good way of displaying his wisdom, is that he will wait to be asked rather than tell. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think for me, sometimes I will tell people stuff with the supposition that everyone knows this kind of thing. And sometimes I don't contextualize the things I tell people without taking into account ego and pride and how people's self-esteem is linked to their ego. So sometimes I'll say things as if it's obvious, not understanding that some people's truths and the truths that they internalize are in order to kind of maintain a certain level of, well, in their eyes, happiness and cognitive dissonance. And I can always be someone that kind of interrupts that, which in itself can be problematic if you are the person that, if you're the messenger. That's why they say don't shoot, because sometimes people don't like the message. So absolutely. I think he's so he's also always been kind of someone that is quite quiet. But
were you afraid of him
growing up? Yeah, definitely, because it's the way that intelligence and wisdom would be displayed. So, for example, sometimes when my friends or kids go out, they'd be like, "Oh, I'm gonna be out past curfew because I had to be home at midnight." And when I was
at what age?
Until I was 18.
Lucky you.
Yeah. Well, how about yourself?
Earlier, a lot earlier.
Oh, really? Yeah. This is what I mean. Yeah.
Yes.
So my parents were insistent on it, and getting to the latter parts of my teens, that got really frustrating when people were going out and they could stay out a bit later. And my dad was like, "I'm not moving on it. So if you don't like it, then you're free to find a hostel or live somewhere like that. If you want to live in a hostel, that's absolutely fine. But I will tell you that in a hostel, you don't have somebody making you dinner on a Sunday and making you rice and peas. You won't have somebody that brings you to America every couple of years. They're not going to take you to Disneyland that often. And, without a national insurance number, you're very limited the amount of jobs you can get. So you can either work in Sainsbury's and you can get paid this much, but then, it's not going to be that, it's not going to stretch that far." So he really broke it down. And I'd almost be like, "Dad, I'm not a bad kid. Like, why are you doing this?" And his reply was that in the eyes of the law, you're 18. And that means that you're an adult, which means then you are able to be accountable for your own actions and decisions. Until then, I am your guardian and I'm responsible for you. And so these are my rules. And I was like, okay. And
you never pushed back on that.
That conversation was the push. That was the push. But it was for me, I guess. But for me, there was an element of reverence for my parents, whereby sometimes parents can say things which can be kind of dismissive, and they may not always realize it when they say, like, "Do as I say and not as I do." Or a parent might say to a kid, like, "Don't smoke," and they themselves smoke.
Yes.
And it's judgmental, but it definitely makes, when someone is growing and forming their perception and their idea of truth and morality, it's very hard for them to to follow an example if your behavior defies the example.
100%.
So with my parents, it's like, if they didn't buy certain things for me and make any extravagant purchases, it wasn't like they were buying stuff for themselves. So it wasn't like my parents themselves, I'd see them behaving badly and then they would just be like, "Shut up," and not explain themselves.
Yes.
They set a very good example. So it wouldn't, so it was kind of like where sometimes I knew about people that would shoplift or steal and stuff. I'm like, there'll be no way I could explain to my parents, because my dad would say something like, "Well, if you really wanted something, why didn't you tell us? Because if you really needed it, then I could have the conversation and make it happen. Or if you can explain why you need something, then I can understand." So there'll never be an excuse to steal. And, it's the same thing where it's like, why do you want to go out? If there's a reason you want to go out, you can tell me. There's no reason you can stay out. But it was even down to, like, sometimes people will be like, "I'm staying over at my friend's house." My parents were like, "You're not staying over at anyone's house. You're not staying over at anybody's house." And again, I used to think, like, well, I guess I'm just first generation Caribbean. They don't play this stuff. But I look back now and I completely understand why. I know exactly why they don't let me stay over people's houses.
100%.
Because it's a much easier way of explaining to, like, a 9 or 10-year-old, "Oh, you can't stay there because somebody might molest you," is insane. Yeah. It's not insane, but it's a very difficult.
You don't say it. It's not spoken about.
It's not spoken about. But they, I understand why they would do it now. And so I just think that I had a good, as I said, I had been able to steep myself in my culture, and there was certain there's certain, I guess, a certain outward there's a creed, obviously, of being a member of this community, whereby it was like, you don't defy your parents, you set an example when you're outside of the house, and you conduct yourself in a way that is not going to, embarrass your family. And I wholeheartedly believed in that. So if they say it and they're good people, then I'll listen to what they say until they do something which is in defiance of their own, their own code of conduct. Then I can't really do anything. Like, my mum went to church every Sunday. I've never seen my dad in the church other than for weddings or christenings or funerals. but he never missed a day of work. He never missed a bill. He's never been arrested for a crime. So his moral conduct in many ways has always been a lot more superior than a lot of men that I know. And so I think obviously a lot of people can romanticize their fathers and the idea of a father, but even now as an adult, a fully grown adult and a father myself, like my dad was a good man. So
what's your emotional relationship like with him now as you've gotten older?
It's definitely improved, and I don't think it was necessarily stunted because of my dad being guarded or not wanting to talk. I was just like intimidated by him. Like I was trying to meet. So I definitely, when I moved out and as I've gotten older, I've definitely made it a point of principle to just speak to my dad on an equal level as an adult.
Adult to adults.
Yes, rather than, because sometimes when you give your parents the status of parent or guardian, there's a pressure for them as well. And I think sometimes we can be very inclined to forget that our parents are all human beings themselves. 100%. They have their own dreams, their own fears, their own traumas that 100%. They are sometimes even working through to this day, if at all. My parents come from a generation of people where therapy was unheard of, particularly for Black people.
Yes.
And they were trying to manage this phenomena of not having no access to psychiatric help against the backdrop of some of the most severe discrimination that the diaspora experienced post the Windrush here.
Okay, if it's all right with you to explore this, have you, first thing before that, has your dad ever told you that he loves you?
Yeah.
He's put his arms around you and held you and said, son, Dane, I love you.
He has, but not sober. And
that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's not to say, but then the thing is, sometimes I think, but if you asked him, would he tell you? And I'm sure he would.
Of course he would. He'd be like that. Of course. What are you asking me that for?
Yeah, but at the same time, but there's been times where he has made an effort to tell me that, he's proud of me, or like, like even like, I feel like a couple of Christmases ago, he'd be like, you should tell me more often when you're on TV so that I can tell your aunt and tell the family. Because obviously I haven't seen you in person, but I know you're brilliant. And, that's enough really. But at the same time, it's kind of like, I guess I try to follow his example of masculinity. So, and again,
we'll touch on that.
Yeah,
we will touch on that.
My dad really has, and a lot of men, because they are the title of like provider and stuff is kind of projected onto them.
Yes.
And so a lot of men is like, I'm doing my job. So men almost have to act coy when you are grateful, show gratitude towards them for their presence, and be like, well, I'm just doing my job. And my dad's kind of that guy, like, well, I'm just doing my job, and I'm your father, I'm supposed to, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, sometimes I have to be like, I think for me, my dad has told me that, but I also feel like it's important for me to tell him as well. And I say that because my dad came here when he was 15. So his interaction and his access to paternal guidance and even reinforcement kind of technically stopped at that point.
Yes.
And yeah. I think it's important to give people the grace of understanding. A lot of time people can only emulate what they've seen.
100%.
So he would arrive at a point where there wasn't someone in person always there to tell him I love you. So knowing how to do that can be very difficult, especially when the cues where other people, like for example, when you look at dominant and white culture, if you're a white person, you can look at a rom-com and know how you tell somebody you love them because it's suggested to you.
Yeah.
Or you can look at a soap opera and see people that look like you experiencing the throes of love and passion. And so it's very easy for you to emulate. Whereas when you come from a community and you come from a people who's only have recovered their humanity for a short amount of time, much less being able to explore so many different aspects of like love and romance and the entire emotional spectrum, it can be a very big ask to, or more simply put, when the whole world tells you they don't love you and they hate you, it's very hard to come home and be like, I love everybody.
100%.
So I always
100%.
have that context when I deal with my parents' generation and their friends and family. But no, my dad is, but also, and this is again a key aspect I think of his personality. He's definitely somebody of actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I guess also with me, I saw a lot of my friends who their parents might be like, "Oh, I love you, son, and well done, son." But then for a larger part of their life, their father is absent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, it's like I think I definitely see acts of service as more of a love language than someone just saying it and
That,
using
that's
their
that's your
reinforcement.
father's love language for
Yeah.
you.
So his
Okay.
love language is more acts of service and
Okay.
even parental guidance. Because like I said, understanding that he's like, I don't want you at the house when I don't know where you are until you're an adult is a sign of being like, I'm concerned for your safety when you're not at this house. So I'm going to put this in place to take care of you. When my parents are
100%.
like, we don't want you to go and stay at somebody's house because you might be predisposed to danger, we can't protect you, is an act of love as well. My
Yes.
parents even being like, you can't eat junk food and we're not going to go to McDonald's all the time because we're concerned about your nutrition. For me, these are aspects of love that,
100%.
in many ways, they go above and beyond. So,
100%. Can I pick up? You alluded to this in terms of the Windrush generation and the generational trauma experience. I'm going to say predominantly by your dad in one way as opposed to your mum in another way. And I'm going to say, has there ever been a point whereby you said to your dad, have you ever wanted to talk to somebody about your own lived experiences?
Yeah, a little bit. But I think that I again broached that topic knowing that that my parents would just be like, it's not really something we do. So the first thing I've always done is say, if you want to talk to somebody, you can talk to me. And I've always said it to him. And and this has been part of this is a confidence building exercise for me as well.
100%.
Basically
How old were you when you were saying that?
Recently, this is like in the last 10 years. This is not like
See?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for me, it's like saying to my dad, and also, but then that's also been a process of myself having the process of being able to see my parents as people, not just as my parents.
Yes.
And having that context when I do look at or critique the flaws they may have, rather than being like, oh, you're not a nice mum to me. It can be like, you are a woman who's experienced some pain and some trauma, and you process it the best way you can. And in the midst of all that, you find the best way to present the best version of yourself to your children. And so, and the same for my dad. So I basically, if my dad's stressed out, it's not really, he's just shouting at my mum, or my mum and dad are arguing. It's like, it's two people having a rough day. I've been in a relationship before. I know when it's shitty.
Yeah.
They've been doing this for like 40 years. So anything you're doing for 40 years, someone's going to get on your nerves. Your closest friends after 40, if you've been friends with somebody for over 10 years and they've not gotten your nerves once, then how close is the relationship?
True.
So yeah, I just have that context when I talk to my parents and just say, you can talk to me. And I feel like sometimes my dad would be a lot more open if he'd had a drink. And that's fine. Because it'd be almost be like a catharsis and just be an outpouring. And when I was younger, and he'd reveal a lot more about his youth and how he grew up, and I'd learn a lot more about him in that way.
That feels hidden the way you're talking now.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That you want to have those conversations, but you're being respectful of.
Yeah, well, it's respectful, but I think it's more to do with the fact that I want to determine best practice for them, because there is this stoicism that just pervades the Black community. I don't want to be someone that walks in and be like, you guys are doing it wrong, because I don't know what you're to come and tell you how you should process this, because that's not my right to tell you. Whatever you've done has allowed me to thrive and brought me to this point where I'm relatively habeas corpus and have sound mind and body. So I'm not going to come and tell you what's wrong. What I think is much more useful is just to provide what we call today a safe space. So when these certain things are drip fed, you just hear what you need to hear, and if they need to elaborate on that, you ask the kind of open-ended questions you can, so they can talk. But I think for me, small examples like my dad. I remember we sat down and watched the episode. Remember the Small Axe series that Steve McQueen did?
Yes.
So the episode The Mangrove, I watched that with my dad, and
Okay.
and he was kind of like, yeah, man, that's why happened. That's how it went down. And for me, it's like, okay, so I know more about you than you've necessarily revealed. And you know what? I realize now as well. I feel like maybe in the way they perceive it is they're protecting us.
I'm going to share something with you. I want to share something with the Hurt Locker. My dad was a brutal man. Brutal. And I'm going to triple underline that. And I never shared that with my kids. Because why should they have to know that this is what happened to me?
Yeah, I get
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, because you might think you're robbing them of an image of, grandparents that, like, that they're not privy to or they have no control over. I think your children caring about you sometimes, they can, that's generational trauma as well. That there can be an element of powerlessness where you can't protect your own parents from their own trauma, can make you feel bad as well.
Yeah.
And so I totally understand why that is as well, because it's like it's just an act of selflessness and love that I don't want you to have to shoulder this. Sometimes this dies with me.
Yeah. And I think on a personal level, my upbringing, me being a father, a parent, because I knew what it's like.
Yeah.
I could never pass that on to another human being, let alone my own flesh and blood.
I say it all the time to people, like, human beings, we have this fascination with. There's a number of different kind of science fiction fascinations we have, and one of them is time travel. And what we don't understand is one of the most effective ways we can time travel is therapy, and for us to address traumas, because your actions in the present of protecting your children from the knowledge of your father's brutality, that also helps the Inca in the past, because now
it's a bridge.
Yeah, it's a bridge, because consciousness is a constant stream that it's all connected. So now, by you doing that, you've already proven to young Yinka, I'm a better example of a father than he was. When you grow up, you will be better than he was.
Yeah.
And even that as a tool can be more effective than maybe you having the strength to hit him back. That
100%.
And also, you've also invalidated his behavior. And this is the other thing that people don't understand, is that when you repeat a behavior, because that's how some people are. Well, I was bullied, and so,
So what? I was abused, so I'm going to pass it on to the next person. That doesn't make sense.
I'm all right. I'm not even hitting them as hard as I was hit, but I turned out okay. Did you though? Because what you're doing is you are validating the actions of that person by
an eye for an eye makes us all blind.
Right, and you're also validating their behavior, because now when the paradigm changes, or the people in the paradigm change, and you're in a position of power, you're doing the same thing. When what you could be doing is killing the proverbial monsters under the bed. And like 100%. I said, that shit dies with them.
100%. You touched on it, and I just wanted to explore this in terms of the Black community. Stoicism.
Yeah.
And this thing to be, it's played out. It's played out. I haven't watched Mr. Loverman.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've watched it yourself.
I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard of it, yeah.
And it's this perception of how we are perceived, as it were, the way we act, all these tropes and stereotypes, etc. But I'm going to relate it specifically to mental health. I'm gonna be direct with you in terms of people growing up from the Black community who you've known, who've struggled with their mental health, who've never reached out for support. And how's it been for you?
It's a shame, I feel like I've lost friends because people in my life have refused to address their traumas. I think that as simple as friends coming to terms with their sexuality, I've lost friends. friends, their egos.
When you say lost friends, are we talking suicide?
No, just people that have been so determined to hang on to the image they think that they should represent, that they just won't let me in. And there's only so much you can do. If for somebody who doesn't want to live an honest life, at least with themselves, there's only so much you can do, because people are so guarded. They're guarded to the point of aggression. Like, some people would rather, they would rather you swing a fist at them than open up your hands to embrace them. And that's how deep it runs with some people. So yeah,
true.
But I think even though sometimes I don't feel like I've lost direct friends through suicide necessarily, like, you can hear about suicides and it can still touch you and still affect you as well, because I can definitely understand when some people do choose to take their own lives. What's definitely preceded that, because the ideation of losing connections with humanity or losing connections with other people and feeling like the world will be better without you not being here is definitely something I've experienced myself. So when I hear about it, maybe secondhand or from someone who's a friend of a friend taking their own life, it's terrible, because you just think, it's a feeling that nobody should have, really. And it can be real sad. I remember there was a comedian I knew, a friend James, who I'd worked with. We met on an improv course, and he ran a few gigs around like Southwest, like Surrey area, like near Kingston. And he used to book me for some early gigs. And this is at a time where comedy was at its very, very base level, and I didn't know where it was going to go and how effective it was going to be. And he got me paid work very early on. And then just heard secondhand that he took his own life, and this was like 10 years ago. And I won't say we weren't super tight, but he was a good person as far as I was aware.
How did that leave you?
Just massively confused more than anything.
In what sense?
Well, I think because, and again, this is something I've tried to research a lot more, but I just think it was just seeing how people that are have experiencing suicide ideation, it's kind of like, when people get hypothermia, but they feel super warm before it really, because the nerve endings are dying. And, in my interactions with him, he never struck me as somebody who was feeling like, they didn't want to be alive anymore. He seemed like a talented person. He is a friendly person, a creative person that was seemingly open to trying new ideas, and maybe with a lot less of the cautious optimism that I have. And it seemed like he was popular around the people that I knew as well, and was always very supportive. So it was it was really confusing and kind of devastating. I'm not somebody who wants to hijack that narrative from his family stuff, because I knew him, but I wasn't super close. But it was really confusing, and it was just like, and to be honest with you, I probably buried that for a long time, to be honest.
Can I ask, have you ever been to therapy yourself?
Yeah, and I have a therapist. I go weekly. What
led you to that? I'm smiling now.
Yeah.
I'm smiling with a happiness.
Yeah, no, it's good. No, it's my second time. The first time I had a therapist was my girlfriend at the time recommended it, because she thought that I was too prone to anger sometimes, or that maybe I wasn't really dealing with my newfound celebrity that well. Because I just remember I remember what happened actually was that I think I had seen a...
Can I pause you for one moment? Yeah. And the reason why I'm pausing you is because I asked you a question about racism growing up and that.
Yeah.
And how you dealt with it. Mm-hmm. And you kind of swerved it.
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't... And my expectation was whether or not you became combative in terms of dealing with it.
Yeah. I'd say massively combative.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Super combative.
So you kind of swerved that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I can.
Okay. So that links So that links now to when
Very-
you're talking about
But
your
the thing about racism is that it's important to make sure that we are talking, understanding if we're dealing with racial rhetoric or racial prejudice versus dealing with institutional and structural racism. So I guess for me, the institutional side was when I noticed that like sometimes in primary school, like kids who I was friends with in school, I wouldn't get invited to their birthday parties. And because their parents would think, oh, he's a bit too this and that. So we get invited to certain birthday parties. And then it was kind of like the double standard in how teachers dealt with conflict and stuff.
Yes.
Whereas the rhetoric, I think for me, was much easier for me to deal with because, like I said, I think that racism or racial rhetoric, why it's so effective is that, you know, a lot of our community, in the most part, like most people, have to consume the same media as everybody else. And if that media doesn't show you, it's very hard for you to see yourself in an equal position to the dominant culture that it does portray. Whereas for me, like I said, I'm looking over the pond to the States. So as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing cooler than black people.
Okay.
So
But you've got that outlet.
I've got an outlet,
You had that outlet growing up.
I've got an outlet. Like I know where my parents are from. I go there. I've been to the Caribbean. I go to the States. I'm in
Knowing your history.
I know my history, yeah.
So
I know who I am. So for me to have that shaken is a much more difficult for me because I know who I am. And, you know, in ways where, like, I guess, even down to small things where it's like in primary school, lots of girls like me, irrespective of their race. So the self-hatred, which tends to underpin, you know, racial trauma, is not necessarily something I'm dealing with because, because I'm just feeling myself, I guess. And whereas and that carries me throughout my life but it's learning to also play that line, as I said, because, you know, I can easily punch somebody in the face, but if they call the police or they alert law enforcement, I know how that's going to look. So that's why I guess it becomes so much more important to know your history and then be able to take that history to use it to rebut any racial stereotypes that are made about you. And I guess also my home life is in direct defiance of racial stereotypes. 100%. I don't live in a council estate. My dad is in my life. All of my sisters and my siblings, we all have the same parents. Like my parents are still in a marriage. So both my parents are gainfully employed. So my dad was working at Ford, so we have 2 cars in the house. So the normal racial stereotypes which are projected onto Black Britons, I can't really relate to them.
Okay.
So
does that feed into a different narrative then for you in terms of growing up, in terms of how you see yourself? Is there an arrogance with that though?
I'd say it's more of a confidence because I think
confidence. Okay, touche.
The difference between confidence and arrogance is I think arrogance is more about affirming your greatness at the expense of somebody else. Whereas for me, it's more like my confidence is like when people are like, well, you know, Black people don't do well in school. I know what you're talking about because I do all the time. So can't relate, I'm afraid. You know, so people's dads are around. I can't relate to that because my dad is around. So, and he goes to work every single day. I guess the first person that called me the N-word, when I heard them read, I was like, oh, so that's why. And from then on, I was like, I understand exactly why.
Got ya.
And also, that also helped me to understand that it's a learned behavior. And, you know, 100%. I'm not sure how much the field of therapy looks into racist platitudes, but
it doesn't.
Isn't that interesting?
I could tell you a story about my training.
Isn't that interesting?
I could tell you about my training the first time around, and when I walked away after training itself because of all of that.
Yeah.
And then I went and retrained somewhere else.
So interesting. It's so interesting that somebody would prioritize the outward appearance of their culture rather than their children's happiness. It's so interesting that you would deny your children opportunities like travel or experiences based on who provides those experiences. And nobody, like, it's so interesting that you live in a post-religious country like the United Kingdom, where people like Richard Dawkins are celebrated for their scientific ideas, as well as Darwinism is celebrated for evolution. However, the same country cannot admit openly that race itself is a construct and there is no separation. By the definition of species itself, we can't be separate races, because the definition of a species are two organisms that can mate and produce viable offspring. And if black and white or Chinese and Indian people have children, those children are not sterile. And therefore, there is no factual nor scientific basis for racism, which means anybody who holds those platitudes is living a life where they are directly in contradiction to scientific fact. If you describe that about any other thing, you would be clinically insane. But for this, you're supposed to be normal and okay. Yeah. The fact that people will provide this idea of superiority and then not provide any reinforcement in that, in any other aspect of their family's lives, you'd say that was insane. Where it's like, well, son, I'm not going to teach you how to read. I'm not going to take care of your nutrition. You don't have to worry because you're better than any black person. And you send people out with that mentality. How can that be healthy? It couldn't possibly be healthy. It's like, you know, I would like to posit a theory. Normalized racism and racial violence, as it's normalized in a country like the United States, is so pervasive and has been so normalized in terms of the ritualistic killing of black people. That is the exact reason why America has the highest number of serial killers in the world. Because murder conducted within a cultural capacity was largely accepted in America and is even accepted today. And this idea that you can go out and watch innocent human beings be killed because of the color of their skin, but then you would come home and have a thriving and healthy relationship with other human beings is impossible. Because if you go to a war and you observe violence within a combat capacity, we all know that soldiers will come back, and we call that PTSD. Absolutely. And that can manifest in violence they show to their own family members. It can result in, as you know, suicide ideation, because the sheer despair of what you see can make you feel fatalistic about life in general, because you've seen it cheapened so much. And yet there are people who went and watched people get lynched walking around free today, and no one thinks about what the long-term transgenerational effect that will be on that populace. It's like, I think they say it's 30% of all domestic violence cases in America are perpetrated by police officers.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you go out in the street and at your shift, you see violence everywhere, you are not getting as much sleep as you can get, you have to have coffee and donuts to keep you awake, or in some cases, in order for you to deal with the people on the street, you're doing steroids in the gym for you to stay in shape as well. You're seeing normalized violence all the time. What, are we surprised that these people are coming home and beating up the people in their own homes when they're when they're questioned about the trauma that they experience in the street, which they're not even able to articulate? Are we surprised that they project that violence onto the people in their homes? Do you know, Yinka, what I find weird? Whenever an innocent person is killed, sometimes they'll try to tell you they were on a drug, almost as if to justify their killing. So, for example, when George Floyd was murdered, some people say, yeah, but he was on fentanyl and blah, 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 blah. Now, even if he was, which we know he wasn't, but even if he was, fentanyl is a more powerful depressant and opioid than heroin. You know what people do not do when they are on an opioid? Go out and start fights.
Fights, of course.
At least pick
in the same token, from 2005 until his murder, his assassination, that, thank God, it was captured live.
Yeah.
Well, none of us could escape from that. None of us. We had to watch it.
Yeah.
16,000 people of color were killed by the police, and not one single police officer was arrested from 2005.
Yeah. Now,
from 2005.
And that helps, and that's just from 2005, and that helps my theory even more. You know, there will always be like, Botham Jean had weed in his house, and this guy was on this, and Eric Gardner had cigarettes. You know, they never tell you when a school gets shot up what the shooter was on. You ever heard the autopsy reveals after the person killed themselves that they were on this much Xanax or this much Prozac or this much they never tell you.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that, because I don't know if you've come across 13th on Netflix.
Yeah.
You've watched it?
Yeah. I mean, I've read it before. I read it before.
Correctional facilities in America and all that, and how it's played out. And Bill Clinton's 3 strikes and you're out.
Yep.
And then when the opioid epidemic kicked in, it was then seen as a mental health issue. But the crack situation was seen as a criminal issue. And
well, I mean, when you talk about Bill Clinton, the most conspicuous example is the one of Ricky Ray Robinson, right? You hear about the guy who had earlier suffered a head trauma, I think maybe to a bullet wound, but he basically had the mental age of a 15-year-old. Was so had such a severe retardation that he was eating his last meal before it was time for him to go to the chair, and they said to him, "Do you not want to finish your meal?" And he said, "It's okay, I'll have it when I get back." That's how little he understood about the situation he was in. And that's the Clinton administration. The Obama administration introduced the drug courts, where they created an entirely separate legislative process for opioid addicts, because they understood it to be a health issue as opposed to a issue of criminality. But then that's also because, but then Richard Nixon explains that he couldn't openly say that we are going to go to war to suppress the blacks here, which is why they introduced the war on drugs. And that's the reason why, for example, being caught with crack up until the reformation of the Rockefeller laws carried a heavier sentence and mandatory sentencing than with powder cocaine. So, but again, I guess that was the darker side of my experience of like looking to the States and seeing how that kind of progressed.
I was gonna ask you about the inspirational, aspirational, but also the contradictory elements of Black America and on your visits there as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wondered about hope. Yeah. Because in order for you to be a comedian, you've got to be hopeful that things can be better. What I do, I do what I do because I'm hopeful that things can be better.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering sometimes, how often do we feel as if we're like Sisyphus pushing that boulder up in there?
Very, very often. Very, very often. I can definitely I empathize with you and I understand how you feel, Yinka. That not only do you have to deal with the confines of the institutions that have linked neuronormality to whiteness, but there's also the resistance to the services you're trying to offer and the help you offer from people that look like you as well. Because like you said, this endemic stoicism within our community, the supposition that mental health is something that only white people experience. And this is something that a learned behavior that's kind of inculcated into us as well. Because before they used to tell slaves that if they wanted to be free, that they were crazy.
Yeah.
So, it's a very similar method of brainwashing, unfortunately. But yeah, definitely to feel like Sisyphus, I completely relate. And yeah, in terms of the hope, I guess it's always, I think it does take a lot of work, but there has to be enough grounding where you're almost like, it's more like the Omega Man. That even if I'm the last man, I still represent a incarnation of humanity. And so as long as I am here, then there's still hope. The important thing about art, however, is that you are trying to create an extension of yourself that can be tangible, but really what it's supposed to stir is something that is intangible. If you can introduce ideas and concepts into people's heads and be an inspiration, these are all intangible attributes, but they are the things that are going to outlive you.
100%. And you know what? You take me back to right at the beginning of our conversation and being frontiersmen and women. And I remember, I forget her name, forgive me on this, but there was a black actress who died recently. And the headline in the newspaper was, she was a trailblazer. And I took offense to that. And the reason I took offense to it was, why should this woman be a trailblazer? And I know what they were alluding at. She was the first person to break through, as it were, to be seen on daytime TV, to be in these soaps, X, Y, and Z. But why did she have to be the trailblazer? Why wasn't it just open?
Yeah.
Why weren't those opportunities just afforded?
Do you know what I think, Yuka? I think that those are the questions that preface the blazing of a trail. That's all I can tell you, really, is that the first person who says, why isn't it like this? And this isn't fair. That's the inception of the change. So that's probably why you remain a pioneer in your field and part of a small minority within the field of like psychiatry, because you question why it didn't exist. And so, yeah, we'll never be able to answer. And you know, I used to say to myself, if the experiences and the traumas that I experienced went extinct and they were no longer around, I'm happy to walk away.
100%. 100%.
Walk away. So,
you know,
yeah.
Can I ask, you mentioned earlier about, and I'm going to touch on comedy, but I want to go back. You went to, was it North Yorkshire? You went to university there?
I was in Bradford, in West Yorkshire.
You were in West Yorkshire. How
Yeah.
was that for you? I know Manningham and places like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, Manningham and West Bowling, that's all right. But when I went to, so my family, a lot of my family are in Huddersfield, which is obviously a town which is about an hour away. Now, Huddersfield has quite a big, thriving Caribbean population, or so I thought, because obviously when I go to, went up there, I'm with family. So when you're a wall-to-wall family and you're going to like events when your family are there, you'd be forgiven for thinking the rest of the town's like that. But then I go to, yeah, exactly. So I go to uni, and I'm telling you, I thought I went through a time portal into the 60s. Like, West Yorkshire was fucking, it's crazy. It's crazy. Like, it's like, and it's happening at a time where it's the turn of the century. So I'm observing, well, at least in music, I'm observing that Black creatives from this country are beginning to experience success within the music industry on an unprecedented level, and almost with an air of independence as well. This is like when garage is getting big, so you got So Solid, and you know, you got Pay As You Go, and I'm just completely enamored with my country and these advances being made in the culture from people that look like me, from a similar background, and seeing references within the mainstream music that I completely understand and have grown up within. It's amazing. What's happening at the same time, though, and I'm not sure if everybody notices, that Black creatives, so far as actors and comics, are disappearing from TV. So a friend of mine, another comedian called Travis J, said something amazing this year on a podcast, where he said, music introduces culture and comedy explains it.
Interesting.
So, as culture is being introduced, the opportunity to provide explanation is being eroded from our screens. So The Real McCoy is no longer on TV, and Get Up Stand Up is no longer on TV, and you haven't really seen Lenny Henry on TV that often. And then like Blouse and Skirt isn't on anymore. So all of these Black comedy formats that existed are beginning to disappear, and even more problematically, they're being replaced by mimics like Phone Jacker and Bo Selector and Little Britain and
don't go there. Don't go there, please. Don't go there. Go on, continue.
And they are replacing us with these mimics, whom, to the untrained white gaze, are being mistaken for aspects of Black culture. So then, even when people aren't necessarily trying to be offensive, they're repeating these distorted versions of the culture back to you.
Okay, I'm just going to mention a film, Tropic Thunder.
Oh yeah, Jesus. Yeah, exactly.
Tropic Thunder.
It messed up for so many reasons. Even though it was, I think it was trying to parody the phenomenon.
Oh my God! It fed into.
Like it fed into it. Yeah, it fed into it because I guess what they didn't realize at the time is that by having this absence of black actors, you're not giving the reference point that people can see this as a parody, and also because the presence of black actors is so seldom seen. Because I remember the early noughties as well was the time where they were trying to like begin to move the street dance into whiteness, because you had like Save the Last Dance, and there's Julia Stiles with Sean Thomas as the black guy, and then it starts moving towards Honey, where it's like Jessica Alba, and she's Latina-ish, but then she's also passable by the time she's in Sin City with Bruce Willis, and then she's good enough to be in a film with a white guy. And then it goes even further. So now there's no more Sean Thomas, it's Channing Tatum.
Yes.
And now it's like trying to give credit like the street dance and then the break dancing to white guys. And as I said, like Ali G is becoming more and more successful now. And I'm hearing people kind of parrot these kind of like, is it because I was black and all these things? And I'm like, I can't believe, and I'm like hearing about these musical acts traveling the country, and I'm like, but then I'm in Yorkshire, I'm like, these people have no idea about black people at all.
Absolutely.
They have no idea. They don't even, these people barely are aware that black people live in the UK. And I realized that for a lot of white people in the UK, if they don't have a black person playing for maybe their local sports team, they have nigh on no interaction with black people at all, because they're not seeing them on TV right now. And this is years before anything close to a streaming platform or everyone really has access to Sky or cable. It's like the early noughties. So their opinion of black people is massively skewed. And that's just the rhetoric side of it, as I said. What I'm dealing with in real life as well is my friends, we go out to Leeds. I can't get in no clubs.
Say that again.
We're going to Leeds to go out on Wednesday because it's student night, and they won't let me into any clubs because I'm black. Not only that, if I get into a room, the bouncer won't let me into certain rooms in that club because he wants me to stay away from the white girls in there. His words, not mine. And that was in Creation in Leeds, sometime around 2002. I don't think it's a club anymore, but
how did you respond?
I can't get into Creation. I can't get into Townhouse in Leeds. Livingston's in Bradford won't let me in unless it's Monday and it's an R&B night. And my friends are in Sheffield. And if they don't say you can't come in because you're black, they'll say your t-shirt is name brand. You can't come in with those type of trainers. You wouldn't like it in here. They play R&B down the road. So I'm dealing with basically to me, this is Jim Crow, because I know my white friends have got coke and they got weed in their pockets. They're not even getting searched when they go into clubs. They're not even getting questioned. As I said to you before, how I've grown up, I didn't really touch a spliff or really drink alcohol until I was like 21. But my criminality is presumed by the time I walk up to the door.
100%.
And it's not just me. It's my cousins. As I got older, I found out my cousins, 7 years younger than me, having the same experience. You're having to go and you're being told you can't come in here without girls. So now you got to meet, and you have to then go and meet girls on the queue and make sure it's too threatening to them, so they're not scared. You can't. Some girls are scared of you. Asian girls are scared to talk to you because if other Asian boys see them, they don't want to be attacked. Cardio. And so these are all your experiences that you're having as well. And then there's the
navigating the waters.
Dark stuff. Then there's the weirder stuff where it's like I'll be walking somewhere or I'm coming home from like the shop and a random white guy from my course wants me to walk him home because he's kicked off with somebody or had something with someone in a bar. And in his head, if they see us walking together, they won't kick off with him. True story. True story. He's like, yeah, if you walk with me, they won't start the fight. All right, when we get into the fight, who's gonna save me when the police come? Yeah, and that didn't just happen once. That happened like twice when people. It's like, Dane, these guys might fight us. Are you gonna come down? No, I'm not coming down because if I come down, when the police arrest me, who's gonna help me?
It's
And this is what's happening. And you know, there's that side. There's the weird fetishization side of people that have not really seen black men before, and then there's the fear and fixation with the black phallus.
Yes.
Where it's like people want to sleep with you, or they might want to sleep with your friend, and then be like, "Well, I want to be in a relationship with you," and I'll be like, "Well, that's not really going to work," and then you're the bad person. It's there's the suggestion. There's also the thing where it's like, "Oh, Dane, I saw this girl that you might like. Okay, tell me about her. She's black. Okay, go on." I wasn't aware you guys have other criteria. This is like what I'm dealing with, and then what's forbid a woman of another race is interested in you, because then you're also going to become a pariah.
Yes.
Oh man.
Yes.
Everyone else can try and have sex with the same girl. God forbid you're even seen talking to her on a platonic level. Everyone's shitting themselves.
100%.
Because apparently I walk into the pubs and I just whip out my dick and slap it onto tables, knocking over glasses and stuff.
Oh my God.
Look what
he's gone and done. What he's gone and done.
Oh, what's he gonna do? It's an insane experience, which definitely, while I have made some lifelong friends at university, it also definitely made me comfortable with my own company.
I hear you.
And again, I definitely feel like had I not had the cultural grounding I had, it may have had a much more devastating effect than it did. Because to go from somewhere like London, where you are in a melting pot of different cultures, and you know, like I said, you're at the epicenter of a growth subculture, to then go into Yorkshire, it's like getting a time warp. And my nephew is like 17 now. He ain't going to that kind of uni if he wants to go to university.
Are you going to tell him to stay local?
I'm going to say, maybe not local, but you need to have a healthy Afro-Caribbean society or have access to your culture. And I mean, it's very different for kids nowadays because they have, you know, social media, which can connect them in very different ways.
Presence as well,
online. But going outside and touching grass, so to speak, is also a very important practice. So to be able to do that and have access to your culture, even if that means maybe you travel and stuff, then that has to be done. Because, you know, that is, I wouldn't go into detail, but I do not want anyone I care about to have that experience of being in the 21st century and being refused entry to clubs because of your race, and you're the only person there that's being refused, and the pathetic excuses being used to turn you away, and you're having to sit there. I'm supposed to be paying $9,000 a term, or being paying $9,000 a term for someone to be like, well, your trainers are a different type of trainers to the type of trainers he's wearing. Or to see my friend not get into a club because he's got a Levi's t-shirt on, and that's name brand, and drug dealers wear name brand t-shirts. I don't know any drug dealers that wear Levi's. What the fuck are we, man? And the worst thing is, it's like, if I had a choice, I wouldn't be here if I wanted to go out. I wouldn't go out around here. This would not be the choice. My friends chose this place. I'm just going with some friends. I would never be here by choice. And a very exhausting experience. I think over time, I learned to go where I was wanted and accepted, and I was finding those spaces.
Okay. But isn't there a loss there? Isn't there an acquiesce? What I mean by that is sometimes I want to just push back.
Yeah.
Sometimes I want to push back and say, yeah, you think you know me and all that, but I will find a way in, you know? But sometimes, and I hear you don't want to be part of that. You don't want to be associated because you are in the minority, as it were.
Because that's more, I guess that's more of the Malcolm X mentality I spoke to you about earlier, where it's like, why do I need to integrate with you? Because what tends to happen is it's not integration, it's assimilation. Because there's a few times when I did get in some of these clubs, I was like, I didn't move my feet the whole night. I'm like, what the fuck do you not listen to in here? It's terrible.
Yeah.
I'd never
Yeah.
heard of cheese before I went to university. I didn't know people danced to adverts and theme tunes from sitcoms.
Yeah.
I was like, this is stupidness. This is the culture that you think you're gatekeeping from me. You may have it.
Yeah.
I'll be fine listening to the music I enjoy in the place that I enjoy. That being said, though, I believe that's where the seed was planted in terms of how I'm going to begin crafting my comedic voice. And
a nice segue.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. You said you've been doing it for the last 14 years.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst?
The two main catalysts for me were the 2008 credit crunch, and then
Go on.
So essentially, I think that on reflection, I definitely always enjoyed comedy, and I think I always wanted to be a creative. But again, as I said, with the upbringing I had, I wanted to emulate my parents and be a provider and have good, stable work and be able to take care of my family and myself should the occasion call. And there was just something that seemed a bit laissez-faire about being a creative, and also massively unrealistic, particularly for a British person. When I juxtapose the state of Black creativity as a hub in the UK versus the US, I was like, we are way off.
No chance. Yeah.
Way off. And also, I think a lot of the time it was like, what it would take to be famous in the UK. I don't want to be that person.
Too much pressure?
No, just what they could deem acceptable by the UK was just like, I always tell people all the time, it's like, when I was growing up, Frank Bruno was supposed to be the model Black Britain. And Frank Bruno had a psychotic break and was abandoned by everybody and in a caravan. And so that to me was like, well, that just goes to show you what they will do when you need their help. So how much does it help you to be like a Frank Bruno? So yeah, I was like, yeah, you're okay. We were given, people like Chris Akabusi and, like I said, Frank Bruno and Chris Eubank. And I think over time, I've definitely understood these men and their the pressures and plights of their journeys a lot more.
In what sense?
Well, because they were people that would have been trailblazers, and they were the people that would have been in spaces where they didn't see a lot of people like them, and they would have dealt with the pressure that I think all of us do. Well, I think they would do with the pressure of this idea that people will embellish if we show any kind of defiance and try to portray us as difficult to work with or as aggressive. And also, you also have to consider as a Black person, any of these spaces of like entertainment or like sports and athleticism, is that your conduct forms a basis for how everybody that looks like you is perceived.
It's interesting you say that. It's so interesting you say that, because I am in a city predominantly white, yeah. Even though it's got the oldest Black community, it likes to talk about.
Yeah.
In Europe, and the oldest Chinese community.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting for you to say that, because I'm wondering whether or not, well, there's a couple of points. When I go down to London, I am so enthused by the dynamism of young Black professionals.
Yeah.
Go-getters. Fucking go-getters. You know? And that no role, no position is beyond their aspirational capabilities, And I think places like Liverpool, etc., were kind of penned in.
Yeah, definitely, and that's it. You're penned in, and that's all. That's the only difference, really, because my observation is there's a lot more unity amongst the diaspora in parts of the north. When I was in Bradford or I went to Leeds, every other black guy would say hello to me. I think
Okay.
Londoners, they're a bit more spoiled, and they were able to, so they can have a bit more discernment even when it's not needed. So, but yeah, it's it's more of a paternalistic situation where normally the state of how your wealthy white people live, there will almost be like a cultural trickle down effect on the diaspora that's within that place. So obviously Liverpool has a much higher working class white population than somewhere like London will have a much higher class. And so by that token, in terms of trickle down effect, black executives or black professionals will be more aspirational. And while it may appear that, black Scousers aren't necessarily as aspirational, what they definitely have is a lot more solidarity, I think.
I think there's a tendency for a lot of black Scousers to leave Liverpool.
Yeah.
Because they acknowledge the ceiling from a very, very from an late teens, early 20s.
Yeah.
And if they don't decide to go to university as mature students, then they'll think, nah, let me get out of here because the ceiling is too thick to break through.
Yeah, because whoever the powers that be who control the Merseyside area are, they might throw a bone to the lower echelons of society. And as a black person, you're fighting with the white working class, you're fighting with white women, and everybody will fight amongst themselves. And unfortunately, we
know how that plays out.
Yeah, we know how that plays out, and why stay and do more of it? But then I think, well, I can speak myself personally. So for myself personally, in terms of comedy, like where my career has gone, I've definitely made it a point of principle that if comics and wherever the black comedy scene exists and black comics based in North are, however I can help them, I'll always try to reach out. There's comics that I've met like Shay Burnley and Sarah Levine, who are both based in Liverpool. And, if I can ever refer them to contacts for work, whether it's in Liverpool or outside, I'm always happy to do that. Or if there's an opportunity where they want me to come and perform, then I do my best to make myself available. If my name can help raise the profile of the night, then I'm always prepared to do that as well, because I understand that the diversity that the diaspora are dealing with outside of a metropolis like London, or maybe to a lesser extent a Manchester or a Birmingham, then I'll definitely try and help, because I know exactly what it feels like to be one of very few in a space. So solidarity is a big part of what influences my work and my conduct in my industry.
Does it mean sometimes that people perceive you as being outspoken?
Oh, massively. And sometimes, like, I'll even meet comics that aren't from this country, and they'll be like, "You go kind of wild on social media," and I'll be like. And sometimes that being said, there is sometimes some truth to that, but and that has caused problems for my career before. But at the same time, fuck it, someone's got to say something, innit?
No regrets?
Too few to mention.
Too few to mention?
Yeah. Like, I can say, even to this day, I've never caused any physical harm or loss to any other human being. I've never been arrested, charged, imprisoned, held on remand, nor tried for any violent crime. And I don't have any debts. So, and there's nobody that can say, I mean, I've had bad breakups and people might say I'm not very nice as an ex-boyfriend, but, I've never harmed a human being and never earnestly raised my hand in anger to somebody. And so, but yeah, and also, and at the end of the day, like, most of the people that have become my adversaries, objectively, have not turned out to be very nice people. And what normally happens is that over time, people tend to realize that. So
the truth will out.
It will in the end, and sometimes it's very hard to see when you are in the midst of conflict. But yeah, I think that it always comes out, and even if it doesn't always benefit you, going back to those same examples, I'm very far from the activist that someone like a Martin Luther King or a Medgar Evans or a Malcolm X or Rosa Parks was, or even a Darcus Howe. But I met Darcus Howe's wife, and she was like, "I know who you are, and you're doing well." And that's probably been one of the better plaudits I've had over all of the comedy awards that I might have been nominated for.
How did that feel?
Humbling, but massively validating. And at times, and I hope you can relate, at times where I feel like I am definitely alone on my path.
You've mentioned that twice now, that
Yeah.
loneliness, that isolation.
Yeah. Because I think being by yourself and being alone are two different things.
100%, 100%. But you can walk into a room filled with 200 people at a party and you can be alone.
You can go to Australia, a whole country, a continent masquerading as a country, as a black person, and you will feel very alone.
Oh, I'm not. Listen, Australia's not on my bucket list. Don't worry about that one. Don't worry about that one.
Yeah, if you think Liverpool's got a way to go, try and imagine Liverpool in the 70s, and that's Australia. There's a lot of work to be done over there, and that British colony on the other hemisphere of the world. And I've been there. I think I've been there 5 times. And again, one of the most
gigging
has been comedy has taken me to places that I would have never considered going as a tourist.
Okay, and how was that then for you? How were you received? Because there's your politics, there's your outlook on life, there's being in that space where there's all these beliefs, these tensions, and yet there's the audience who wants they say, "Now make me laugh, Dane."
Well, it's a really good question, actually. I think you can find all of those different aspects of the experience even within the comedy rooms. Like, I've been to Melbourne, been to Sydney, been to Perth, been tour of the West Coast. Now, Sydney is seen by most as a metropolitan city within Australia, and obviously having the Opera House and having a thriving and rich LGBT community. But if you go North Sydney, that's very different. You go North Sydney, you walk onto a stage, and a white lady will still grab her handbag, even though you're on the stage, or clutch her husband, or
wow.
It's crazy. But two things I think helped me to navigate that. One being knowing who I am and knowing I should be here, and also having enough belief in my ability as a comedian to change people's attitudes.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
The other thing is, again, being like, you have to do it for there. Somewhere in the UK, there is a black dude on the open mic circuit who's getting his act together. And by the time he gets here, this has to be a different place for him. So, you blaze a trail. But most importantly, I think for me as well, is that it's like, I am aware that there is a indigenous population here who aren't even given the opportunity to come on a stage like this. And I'm going to be damned if I come here trying to monopolize the experience of racism and anti-blackness in Australia, when what I'd rather do is provide a good example for those indigenous Australians, and more importantly, kind of open up like the comedy equivalent of diplomatic relations.
I hear you.
So
will part and parcel of your act be around all that?
Yeah, a little bit, but given my experience, but I like to just maybe use material that's a bit more disarming and focus on the commonality between myself and the audience, which you tend to find. I think comedy is laughter is a universal language.
100%.
But I definitely put some stuff in there that is definitely for my for our brothers and sisters on the other hemisphere. And I think for me, if I can continue to have material that entertains and inspires my Indigenous Australian friends and colleagues, then that is as big as an achievement as being nominated for an award over there. So just them knowing that we hear them and we understand and respect them, and that when I'm in Australia, I represent them as well as myself, and I'm doing TV galas, or even in New Zealand, like that's what's important to me. And I say that now because obviously I'm having a conversation where I'm enjoying myself and I feel heard. But I think it's good to kind of affirm these things, because sometimes your ego will make you forget it. What's most important?
You know what? Maybe you can give Jamie Oliver some pointers.
I'd love to. Well, it's funny because one of the comedians, a good comedian friend of mine, Nigel Ung, he first did a video on how bad Jamie Oliver was making Asian dishes like fried rice. He became Uncle Roger, so he went viral, and now he's become an internet sensation who was a very talented comedian. And he one day did a video on how crappy Jamie Oliver was at making rice. It went viral, and he has been able to open himself up to a whole new fan base around Southeast Asia, because he's Malay Chinese, and he opened up himself to the entirety of the population of Southeast Asian comedy audiences, as well as the diaspora who exist like in places like Australia. And he's now back in Malaysia, where he's opened up his own restaurants doing fried rice properly.
Stop it! Brilliant
things. It's a really inspiring story, and genuinely, I hope to do the same. Like, I've had the privilege of performing like in Johannesburg and stuff as well. And I got to meet like amazing comedians from Nigeria and from Malawi and from Zambia, and obviously, from South Africa as well. And I really hope to be able to go there a lot more regularly and connect there as well. And also, like, I've done shows recently in like the Netherlands, and I've definitely expressed the desire to open myself up to the kind of Afro-Dutch community as well.
Yes. Suriname community, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Massive Surinamese, Curacao, and these. And so I went on a cruise. So I went on a cruise in 2001 with my family on a Caribbean cruise, and I was opened up to the richness of the Caribbean as well. I think for a lot of us, we think that like Caribbean is like the British West Indies. When there's the Dutch West Indies. I went to Martinique, that's the French West Indies. And this whole new world where even more diversity exists within the Caribbean as well. And for me, it was like even the culture which I attach myself and derive a certain level of esteem from is even bigger than even I've given it credit for. And so then that was almost such a powerful experience that, again, go back to uni, I was like, I'm definitely not coming out with you guys. I don't need to. This place is small potatoes to me, but it's now I want to act upon that. And how can I connect with my global community, with my work? And that's like a big part of my goals moving forward. And it's not that I'm like a segregationist or I want to be separate, but it's because I believe, and again, the theory is, the richer you are as yourself, the more you have to offer the world at large. And that's a community as well, is that we can't hope to integrate if we are a broken people anyway. And
or change.
If we're broken on a psychological basis, and if the world won't acknowledge our trauma, we have to do that intracommunally ourselves. And
can I offer this? I fucking love your bravery.
Oh, thank you. Likewise.
No, I love what it is that you're doing. I really,
because
sincerely.
Sometimes I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. So I really appreciate it. I genuinely sometimes I'm like, what am I even doing? Do people even care? Do people even know?
People care. People know. People listen.
Yeah, and sometimes you think, I wish my bank balance reflected this adulation.
You know what? That's
ego.
Absolutely.
That's ego. Because at the same time, when I feel like that, and that's just from ego stemming from the fear of being able to provide for my family, because I never wanted to be like a creative or like a a jazz musician where I'm doing something new and trailblazing, but I can't feed myself. For me, it's just because I also understand that peace of mind is something that money cannot buy. And when people do talk about money and fame and esteem, I always say to people, listen, Alexander McQueen was in haute couture, and he was in the most lavish and expensive rooms with all of the movers and shakers, and his mother died and he refused to live in a world without her. And part of me respects that.
You know what? It's funny you should mention him, because I've still got the Star Wars edition of The Face with him that he produced, and it's stunning.
Yeah.
Stunning. It's funny. You referenced Bill Hicks as well.
Yeah.
I think legend. And these were just two examples of human beings who were willing to, for want of a better phrase, go against the grain and ask, why can't it be like this?
Yeah.
And just do it.
That's the existential question that I think has guided my work for the last 14 years. And I think that since I've been in the industry, the external pressures of being in show business make you sometimes worry about other aspects of the celebrity that you think should matter. Like, do you get invited to the parties and the premieres, and do other people know you? But again, I'm thankful that I have like a girlfriend that understands who I am and has to remind me sometimes if I falter, and remind me of what's important to me. And that's, as I said to you, it's like, why can't things be different will always be the motivator. And I think that that's the precursor to the hope that we need. And I think right now we might be on the cusp of needing that mentality more than you and I remember or recorded memory. I think a lot of the people around now at our age, we may have some idea, but there is a younger generation that have not had that experience. And I do not want us to backslide into a state whereby they have to have the same experience as our predecessors.
Yeah, but it's a bit like an oil tanker, a super tanker. It can turn around, but it moves fucking slowly.
Yeah,
that's the issue. Main
thing is, but it does move. But you have to. But that also requires somebody working that rudder and working that wheel. Because if you just get complacent, especially something like an oil tanker, very easy to fall asleep at the wheel.
It's true.
So you just have to keep wits about you. Keep navigating.
100%. Can I ask? I think I know what you're going to say. What we'll say. Who's the most important person in your life?
My daughter.
I knew you were going to say that.
I never thought I'd be that person, because I just think it seems easy and cliche, but oh no, definitely, without a doubt. And the second most important thing I'd say is her mother.
Okay, well, I'm going to challenge you, and I'm going to say the most important person in your life is you. You're the expert of you.
That makes sense as well, because you have to be the whole to be able to contribute to these people.
100%.
So that makes sense. And I think where I've had some struggles mentally more recently is that I've had to remind myself that you are the best asset to your family when you feel whole and of sound mind and body yourself. So no, you're absolutely right.
You know what, Dane, Baptiste, this has been a bloody pleasure.
No, it has, man. It always is good to chop it up, man. And I definitely.
I could continue more.
I'm happy to come back when you're ready. We'll speak to a few people and we'll do part 2. I'll be happy to, man. I find these exchanges very humbling. And again,
you know what? In less than 3 months, we're gonna have a follow-up. Okay.
Let's do it. And also, like, obviously, you're doing important nuanced work in terms of like helping, like I said, Black men who are in midlife and at an age where suicide becomes a much higher probability, and just working class men.
Let's talk around that.
I'd like to be involved in that and stuff as well, especially because however you choose to articulate it, there is an element of crisis among men, And
okay, let me leave this with you.
yeah,
Let me leave this with you. The Office of National Statistics quoted less than 3 months ago that suicide increases have been on average 6,500, but it was the highest recorded since 1999. Okay.
mm-hmm.
I've done a freedom of information and I've asked the question. We know 6,500 people die in England and Wales, but why is it that they don't break it down by ethnicity?
Well, yeah, because they know what the resultant outcry would be if they did that.
Why is it? I know personally because I've done the research and I'm doing some stuff on it. And because I'm a bricklayer. I was a bricklayer, yeah. 700 people die in the construction industry each year. That's 2 a day. That's 2 a day.
It's crazy.
And yet we don't know how many people the global majority die.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy that people. It's almost frightening to think that there are people who are profiting from hiding those statistics. But rather than dwell on that side, we're going to pull these people back from the figurative and literal ledge. That's the key.
So I welcome your support.
No, absolutely. I'm behind you. And I'm going to tell you this as well, Yinka. I might be on TV and shit. Your job is infinitely more important than my own. And I'm glad you're here. And yeah, it's much more important, the work that you're doing. It's more important than preachers and pastors in their pulpits.
It's the body politic. There's all connection. Anything that goes on in Gaza affects us. When you stub your little finger, it affects your entire being. Yep. It's the same thing.
Yep, exactly that. And that's what it is. We are still part of a collective consciousness, and there are a lot of distractions that we deal with on a daily basis that try to make us forget that. And we need to be reminded of that, because the more technology is proliferating, and now that we arguably might not be the most dominant species in the next 50 years, we have to work about how we're going to ensure our well-being for the foreseeable future. So I'm interested to exchange those ideas with you, man, and I'm really happy to be on here. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dane. It's been a fucking pleasure.
Likewise, man. Thanks so much, guys.
Cheers.
See you soon, man.
The Hurt Locker is a safe space for our guests to openly share their mental health experiences. If you have been affected by any of the content in this recording, then please reach out for support. If it is an emergency, dial 999. If you would like to talk to somebody today, then please call the Samaritans on 116 123. Stay safe.